According to an article published today by Migrant Insider, ICE deported 70 U.S. citizens between 2015 and 2020. And so let's talk about how this happened. One is internal training. While ICE, in theory, ICE officers are supposed to review with a supervisor when someone declares that they are a U.S. citizen, they are not necessarily doing that, and their training materials contradict that rule. And so officers often act alone, and they're making these decisions on their own without reviewing the case with a supervisor. And secondly, and I think most importantly, is this. ICE officers are not required to update someone's status after they have verified citizenship. So imagine a scenario where somebody is in their records and shares the same name, Juan Lopez, as someone else who has a order of removal or is removable. Juan Lopez, the other one, is a U.S. citizen. They verified his identity many times. They verified his citizenship status many times. However, after being detained and processed by ICE, they do not need to update their systems to reflect that Juan Lopez is in fact a U.S. citizen. So that, coupled with awful training, has resulted in thousands of U.S. citizens targeted by ICE, and some even deported. Again, 70 U.S. citizens deported in a 5-year period between 2015 and 2020. That obviously encompasses the majority of Trump's first term. And let's talk about this situation with Mr. Davino Watson. He was a New York-born citizen detained by ICE in removal proceedings for 3 years. He did not have an attorney, had very little education, despite being, again, born in the U.S., so this isn't a product of their country, as many maggots would say. No, this is ours, one of our own. We have failed to educate him, did not have knowledge of the process, did not have money, a young kid, 23 years old, who remained detained for 3 years in a detention center, repeatedly writing letters to the judge, to ICE officers, sending in his own father's naturalization certificate, only to be ignored that he was a U.S. citizen. And then when he got out, he sued the government for wrongful detention, and they said that the statute of limitations had run while he was in detention. So that statute of limitations was a 2-year period. They said it began to run at his first court date while he was detained. And so since he got out 3 years later, the 2 years had run while he was detained, and there was no equitable tolling of that. So, I'd like to bring some awareness to the fact that anybody could get detained by ICE, anybody could get deported. There is no due process. Due process isn't something only afforded to U.S. citizens by law. And secondly, how do you prove you're a U.S. citizen if ICE doesn't believe you? So this is why it's really important that we understand what due process is, why it's important everyone has it, and also why it's important that our government and our ICE officers, if we have ICE, are properly trained and everyone has access to counsel.